Representative Michelle Rayner is the first black openly queer member of Florida's legislature. The civil rights and social justice attorney represents House District 70, which covers residents near Sarasota and Manatee County. She is also running for Congress now and recently endorsed by Emily's List. Representative Rayner, thank you so much for joining us tonight on Amplified. I mean, I just want to turn the floor to you and start with your reaction. One, congratulations on being a historic first yourself. Here you are in your job and your colleagues throw these crazy policies down on the table, which really hit home because, as I always say, the politics can get really personal for folks like us. So give me your reactions. What were you thinking when all this started to get introduced?
Well, first, Aisha, I'm so happy to be here. But, it was interesting when you talk about it getting personal. The speaker told one of my other colleagues, who happens to be a gay man, that you should not take this personally. And it's hard because policy is personal, politics is personal. And literally, especially on 1557, there is a picture that of myself and Representative Carlos Guillermo Smith standing in front of the well, in front of the chamber, and looking at our colleagues and saying, if you're going to vote up on this bill, if you're going to vote for this bill, and you're going to debate in favor of this bill, you're going to have to look me in the eye when you do it. First off, this bill, both bills, the Don't Say Gay and y'all say Stop Woke. I say Ron DeSantis doesn't like black people bill. And that's what I call it. And I mean, both of these bills are bills that no one has asked for. Not one constituent of mine or any other has asked for these bills. And in fact, when we had language that I introduced, and then also in the Senate that Senator Brandis introduced to replace sexual orientation or gender identity with human sexuality and also sexual activity, to make sure we're running the gamut and not singling one person or group of people out, that was voted down and rejected. So the premise of these bills is very clear. It's to discriminate against LGBTQ folks, and it's also to discriminate against Black and brown people and other marginalized communities, because Ron DeSantis has to win a culture war, because this is the only way he can talk to his base so he can run for president. He's not concerned about the state of Florida, because if he was concerned about the state of Florida, we would be dealing with our housing crisis. He is concerned about himself and making sure his political future is intact instead of the Floridians.
I'm so glad that you remind us that ain't nobody asked for this mess. Nobody asked for these bills, right? Your constituents didn't ask for them. And in fact, what this Republican crazy conservative witch hunt often is an attempt to supposedly solve for problems that don't actually exist. So I'm curious, you are standing there staring these people down and forcing them to look you in the eye. What are they saying about the need for this bill? What are they trumping up the excuses for why they must enact this legislation?
So for the Don't Say Gay bill, the first thing that folks said is that we don't want to talk about sexual activity. So you are equating who someone identifies as to how they have sex. Make that make sense. The math is not math, right? And so that's number one. A senator on the other side of the other chamber literally made I guess the best way to say is he made sure to say that LGBTQ folks were like drug users. These were words that were said in the chamber, in legislation, in arguments. Yes. And then when you're talking about the Stop Woke Act or the Ron DeSantis Hates Black People Act, what the bill sponsor was talking about, we shouldn't teach history the way that of slavery and all these things, because we don't want people to feel bad. Well, I think we should feel discomfort, Aisha. I think we should feel uncomfortable when we're talking about slavery, when we're talking about the Jim Crow South, when we're talking about Black people getting killed in the street, when we're talking about the Holocaust, because if we're not uncomfortable about it, we are bound to repeat it. And we see that happening now in the Republican Party, this just this strain of red, hateful meat when we're talking about anti-Semitism and we're talking about racism. So once again, I want people to be uncomfortable, because if you're not uncomfortable, we're going to repeat this history over and over again.
You know, people always say, oh, the children, and clutch their pearls, especially around conversations with sexual orientation or gender identity. And one of the things that's interesting about this is that they put a fine point on saying that from, I guess, pre-K through third grade, you have to teach age-appropriate whatevers, right? Shouldn't everything be age appropriate, number one? And number two, just kind of put the fine point on the consequences of having these measures in elementary school. One, what is the harm that happens, especially with queer youth or youth that happen to have queer parents? And then how are they penalizing teachers and administrators if they don't follow the rules?
Listen, you're telling children that they are different and that different isn't good. You know, for example, what if my wife and I have a child and they come to school and they want to talk about how their two moms are their heroes, or they do the family tree project? Is that going to be allowed? Those questions weren't asked and those questions weren't answered. And Aisha, when we were having this debate, we had the pages, which are young folks that are messengers on the floor. And I literally had two young people who were listening to this debate come up to me and say, Rep. Raynor, I just want to thank you so much for what you're doing. I know this bill is going to pass, but I want to thank you for standing up for me. So our babies are watching what we're doing. These kids know what's going on. We're worried about banning books. We're worried about not talking about LGBTQ folks. Well, Aisha, these kids got cell phones. They have cell phones. They can go on TikTok. They can go on Monkey or whatever it's called, and Facebook, Instagram, and find out more than they could ever learn in a classroom. And what you're telling children is who they are or not is not okay, whether they're Black, brown, LGBTQ. And they're saying if they have a family that is LGBTQ, or if they have a Black family or whatever that may be, that that's not okay. And the consequences for teachers, that they may have to out a student. In fact, there was an amendment that got struck down that the bill sponsor wanted teachers to have to out students. And we know that LGBTQ youth are more likely, 40% more likely to either attempt suicide and then are often successful. So what message are we telling our children? Everyone wants to talk about the children, but the question I have is, how are the children?
Right. So is anybody thinking about the children's feelings? It seems to me that they're thinking a lot about the white kids' feelings. I want to come back to what you were saying about being uncomfortable and having real conversation. All these rules seem to be about protecting a certain type of white person's feelings. Talk to me about, you know, what you say to white folks who are like, oh, I feel guilt. I have the crocodile tears. I am ashamed and don't want to talk about queer issues. Why should they care and push back against this legislation?
You should care for several reasons. And first off, you know, when I have friends or colleagues tell me that they feel guilty, I'm like, okay, that's great. But what are you going to do with that guilt? Are you going to sit at your dinner table and when your uncle or your aunt says something out of bounds, are you going to check them? Are you going to assert the privilege that you have and stand up for folks when you see something that's happening? Are you going to not only shift from being an ally, but to being an accomplice? What does that look like? And so for me, I tell them that in this time, in this season of life, where we're at in this country, it's important for people to shift from being an ally, but to being an accomplice, meaning we're in this thing together, meaning that you have some skin in the game. And so for me, when you don't want to have skin in the game, I have to also look at how are you really operating? That to me, it means that you benefit off of your privilege and you know you benefit off of this privilege. So you're nervous to say, well, what if I do something to jeopardize that? And so what if I do something to
Michelle,
jeopardize?
I got to leave it right there. I got to leave it right there, girl. Be an ally, be an accomplice. Yes. Representative Michelle Raynor from Florida, also now congressional candidate. Thank you so much for joining us tonight on Amplified and for fighting the good fight down there.